Welcome to my new episode podcast. Welcome to podcast Šime Show. With me is Hannah from Norway.
Hi,
Hannah,
thank you. I'm happy to be here.
welcome to podcast and thanks for accepting waiting in my podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm happy for the opportunity.
Thanks. Hannah, who you are?
Well, I'm a psychiatrist. I was born in Norway, and now I live in Switzerland with my husband because he's Swiss. And I worked as a psychiatrist in Norway, and then I came here and I worked here as well. So, and now, when I became a mother 6 years ago, I stopped working at the hospital because, I tried having my daughter in the daycare and realized a couple of things when I was doing the juggling of going to work and having my kid in daycare. So before that, I was a feminist, as everyone is when they're born in Norway and grow up there. And I had these attitudes, I had these beliefs of what a woman should do and be, and how a mother should be, how you should live your life. And trying to be a mother, a working mother, completely changed my perspective on everything. And then I had a huge transformation. I started dipping into the conservative space, started reading people like Janice Fiamengo, which were those things were very far from what I used to sorry, now I'm hearing it beeping. Good. Are you there? Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Yes.
Oh, sorry, you're so still. I didn't. So those teachings were very far from what I'd been reading and the beliefs that I held before. And once I opened myself up to all that information, I saw how that really tallied with my personal experiences of first of all, how painful it was to be parted from my baby, how that was all that I could think about. And very funny, the things that I used to do. So I was a career woman. I'd achieved a lot. My goal was to be an attending, to be a head of a psychiatric department by the time I was 31. I'd done everything quickly. That was my goal. I wanted to have that title. I wanted to have the office, everything like you see in movies, right? I had it from somewhere. And then once I had my daughter in daycare and I was parted from her, none of those things mattered anymore, really none of them. And I for 7 months, I worked at the psychiatric clinic, and I was doing something really difficult at that time, something I was really struggling with. I wasn't the best at it, so I had to really, really work hard. And then 7 months had passed, and I'd finally managed at work to do that thing, to learn that thing that I was doing. And I got amazing feedback, and I thought, okay, that felt good, I guess. Then I went to pick up my girl then I went to pick up my baby, and then after work, it was 6:00 in the evening, and the person there, they have these girls working there, and she told me, oh, you know what? Your daughter, she always smells so good. She's always the kid that smells so good. And I was just like, oh my God, that was just like, I had this feeling like really like chills, like really well done. And I thought, like, hold on, someone tells me my daughter smells so good, and that, then you get that feeling. You just did something that you're working on for 7 months, finally got that right, and you thought, well, okay, I guess. Like, it was just, and that was such different. It just snapped me right out of it. So, and then that I let that transformation happen. And also in my period doing in my psychiatric residency, and I also did at the University of Zurich, I also did a psychotherapy degree. So I was working as a doctor in the hospital, and then on the weekends I would go and do the psychotherapy education at the university. So I was doing a lot, and then I started realizing that none of the things that they were teaching really worked, right? I was stuck with these patients in therapy, patients that didn't really belong in therapy. Like, I think that people get more help from religious communities, from churches and synagogues, etc., than they do from a therapist in a lot of cases. So, and then I started yelling at the TV when we were watching stuff. Like, it's not right. You know, whenever you saw a therapist on television, or some woman would say something like, "Oh, you just have to love me the way you are, the way I am, and you just have to accept me the way I am." Things like that, I would get very irate, because it's not true. And they're giving these messages to women that are not, and people. And then I started yelling at the television, and my husband said, "You know, you just have to start writing. You just have to start, doing something, because you're right and you're feeling so strongly about this, and I think people need to hear it." So that's when, so I'd been out of the workforce for a couple of years, maybe almost 2 years, and then I started writing, and then that became then starting this podcast that I call Psychobabble, which is really just exposing the flaws in the narratives that we're told, and why those narratives, like, for example, you have to accept yourself just the way you are, will lead to us just having poor mental health, being sicker than we need to be, being in therapy longer than we need to be. And I think that if we would aspire to more conservative values, right, where we're talking about responsibility, where we're talking about doing things for yourself, and also on a political level, because I come from Norway, I've seen how very very, very liberal policies lead to us getting sicker. So that's also what I then talk about in the podcast, how those things will lead to being actually more compassionate in the end for more people than liberal policies, which is...
I first time see you in we talk with Rebecca Morgenstein.
Mistereken, yeah. So we're doing a show on X called Conservative Psychiatry.
Yes, and X, I first time you see you podcast and everything about you with Rebecca.
Yeah. With Rebecca. So that's a sort of a side thing that we're doing. It's an X original show. It's called Conservative Psychiatry, and it's sort of a the topics we talk about there are more sort of trending, more fun, very shorter episodes. But we're talking about things like the recent episode was called why women choose bad boys, or we talked about dating. How do I know if I'm dating a feminist? Things like that, fun topics. And Psychobabble is more, it's more serious. We're really getting into a lot of philosophy, a lot of cultural issues, but the message is really what psychology is doing wrong, and how that is contributing to our poor mental health collectively. Because the burden of psychiatric disease does not match how much resources goes into mental health. Like, imagine how many psychologists, psychiatrists, and therapists that we're educating now compared to earlier, how many people have access to mental health treatment. And we're seeing, like, for example, one of the things we wanted to talk about was Norway, right? So what's going on in Norway? And last year, 22% of Norwegian women, like on the whole, went to their family doctor and complained about psychological distress of some form of psychiatric.
22%.
Psychiatric. 22%. of the
It's so.
female population. That is a lot for the country that is supposed to do everything right and have all the possibilities for women. You know, you have free daycare from every child is 1 year. At 1 year old, you have a right to full-time daycare. And you have people are living in egalitarian relationships like men. And there was an article about this that I saw, which was quite fun, but serious, that Norwegian men do the most laundry in the world. Right? So you have Norwegian women who have access to everything, and men who help out more than any other, like any other male population. So, and still they are feeling burnt out, anxious, and depressed. Why? Makes no sense. And you have kids, the numbers on behavioral disorders in kids in Norway is way too high. And I'm talking about ADHD, defiant disorder, all these sort of the collection of the letter diagnoses, in kids.
I have a question. I hear the many men who want kids and family in Norway not found girl or woman for marriage in Norway and going to Thailand in Philippines and marriage with Philippines woman. Philippines woman want have kids, have family. Do you true or not true?
I mean, there's all over the West, there's a trend of passport bros. I think that's what you're talking about, right? Or people who are going abroad to find women who share the same values as they do. And that definitely is happening. And I understand it. I really do. Why would you want to marry someone who wants to be just like you in a marriage? You want to have clear, you want to marry someone who's not just the same as you. You want her to be feminine. You want her to be your counterpart, not your equal. I'm not saying that women aren't equivalent. They are equal in value, but we shouldn't be the same. And in Norway, it's really gone the furthest in the world when it comes to egalitarian measures and policies, and that obviously trickles down into how people live their lives. But funnily enough, it's because women in Norway have also we have quotas in universities. You have quotas in a board on corporate boards. You have to have a certain number of women working there. And pushing women into these fields is actually doing the opposite. So, but that's for another day. But yes, this is a trend that's happening. To answer your question,
Which country is more liberal with feminism and other, Swiss or Norway?
That's definitely Norway. Well, in the cities in Zurich, for example, Zurich and Bern, the big cities, you have it's quite liberal. You have a lot of women in the workforce, but it's you also have the rural areas in Switzerland where they have a lot more. They live according to conservative values, so it's to balance it out a little bit. But Norway is the country that has the most women in the workforce, actively in the workforce. If that's what you're, and also because Switzerland is a very conservative country. It's with federalist system, very low taxes, very small state, and Norway's the opposite. Very big state, very nationalized, very centralized. Public schools, public hospitals, public universities. So culturally, they're similar in some things. Like people are more reserved. People are quite loyal. They're quite patriotic. But when it comes to policies, they're very, very different. Did that answer your question?
I from Croatia, and we have Middle Europe. We living in Middle Europe. Croatia, Hungary, Slovenia, Slovakia, Czech Republic. We are not very liberal like country in Western Europe. We are more conservative. We are not so heavy problem with modern feminism. We not have so problem with gender ideology, change, gender operation. We are not so more problem with this.
Okay.
I know the Canada is very liberal about question gender ideology and feminism and other. I think the official in Canada exists 50 gender.
Yeah. That sounds right. Yeah.
And I have one question for you. You are medicine, you are doctor, you are psychiatric. How you in your practice see problem with young women, young girls for feminism and feminism culture?
Yeah, I talk about that a lot, and I've written a lot about that. So I like to separate them into 3 categories depending on which age they're in, because that is the pattern that I saw. I saw a lot of women because I worked specialized in anxiety and depression, and the majority of women fall into that. They tend more towards anxiety and depression because we're more sensitive to negative emotion. So I would see, for example, a woman in her 20s. That's the sort of the first category, the first archetype, I call it. And she would be in the middle of a degree that was almost too difficult for her. She wouldn't have the capability to finish it, so she'd be stuck and she would be repeating it again and again, or she would try to finish her master's thesis and she couldn't. It was just, in the end, it would just be too hard for her. And that's, a consequence of us pushing girls in directions where they don't have a natural affinity to, if you understand me, because we are tailoring school systems to girls. We're teaching in schools, we're teaching the way that girls learn rather than boys. And we are giving girls quotas in universities. We're preferring girls to go. We're constantly encouraging girls through pop culture. You go, girl, you can do anything you want to do. You are, you're much smarter than you think you are. We're constantly encouraging girls in the way that we aren't encouraging boys. And they would go on to do these complicated university degrees when they'd really be interested in people and relationships, and what you then get from building a family. But because girls are told you need to be financially independent before you can have a family, and you need to secure your career before you can have a family, they wouldn't focus on that. They would try to just focus on their career. And what happens, because a woman who is average female characteristics, so agreeable, neurotic, which is the traits that we need to take care of infants. We need to be patient. We need to be compassionate. We need to be able to respond when they call. We need to be aware of threats. So those things are in majority of women in a way that they aren't present in men, right? So we have we're more similar than we're different, but men and women differ very much on the edges. So the most compassionate, agreeable, neurotic people will always be women. and vice versa. But so these women would be struggling with concentration, they'd be struggling with sleep, they would come in with some form of anxiety because they're realizing subconsciously that their goals are not the goals that they really want to achieve. So they have an attachment need that they want to have filled. So they're dating, they're looking for mates, but in the wrong way. They're dating like men and not finding the men that they want to find, if you understand. So they're going out every night, they're dating a lot, but the men that they're meeting up with, they don't want to settle down. They're in their 20s, they want to have fun. And because they meet these girls at parties, of course they're not going to stay the next day. So these girls end up feeling lonelier and lonelier, not solving their problems, and in turn they can't concentrate in school, they can't finish their master's degrees. They then turn, they get anxious. So then they would come to me, they would want different things, but they would never really understand why they were having these issues. They would then start wanting to search in their past, and they thought, maybe I have these problems because my parents got divorced when I was 9, or, because we can rarely place the blame correctly onto our problems, right? When we feel a negative emotion, immediately we're looking for a cause. But very few people are actually able to find the appropriate cause. So we'll search for something to blame that's convenient, that's right there, that's apparent to us. So they would come to therapy wanting to sort of sort out different things in the past and thinking, maybe I have a trauma. And they think that going through that potential trauma or going through that thing that happened, that will immediately solve their present issues, which it never does. It doesn't help to wallow in negative emotions from the past. It's not going to unlock a memory and then make you feel better, which is sort of what psychologists will sell in therapy. And they will let these girls sit there and go through their parents' divorce when they were 9 or whatever they think they've experienced. And that's when people will be stuck in therapy for a very long time. That's Psychobabble. So this girl, she's been lied to, she's been told untruths, and she's landing in therapy. And those untruths, they're caused by feminism. They're feminist attitudes like, you go girl, you can do anything you want to do as long as you want it enough. When has that ever been true for anyone? You can do anything you want to do as long as you want it enough. No, we're born with different capabilities, different interests, different personalities. So, and we have to tailor our lives according to those. Otherwise, we're going to land in trouble. So that's one thing. The other thing she's been told, feminist attitude, is that your career will be the most important thing in your life. You can't do anything unless you're financially independent. Don't lean on a man. Don't set your life up so that you'll be dependent on a man. That is the worst thing you can do. So these are the things that she has been told that's landed her in the therapy chair. So that's the first one. And the next one is 30-something. So she's a 30-something-year-old woman. She'll be the one that came through this difficult university degree. And she's been living with a boyfriend, or has had a boyfriend for maybe many years, sometimes 5 years, 7. But it would be non-committal because she's focused on first her university degree, then her career, right? And she's coming to me usually because of a burnout or depression. And a burnout is just, it's the symptoms of depression, but it's when you suddenly look up from your desk and ask, why? Why am I doing this? Why am I busting my ass? For what? Because she's turned 30, maybe she's usually she's like 34, 35, when suddenly she realizes, I want a family. That's what I want. And this other stuff, that's noise. And then suddenly you aren't aligned. Your motivations aren't aligned with where you suddenly find yourself. And when that goal shifts, all the negative emotions pour in. Because, you know, you get positive emotions when your body is telling you and your brain's telling you, good job, you're on the way to that goal that you want. That's positive emotion, that's the dopamine. And when you reach a goal, you get the serotonin kick. Good job, then you feel the dominance of being on your way to your goal. But if your goal suddenly shifts from one week to the next, you're going to be in the wrong place. You're going to have all those negative emotions. Right? Does that make sense?
Is that logical?
That's where she's at. That's logical. But
Yes.
that she suddenly looks up from her desk and she's exhausted, because that's burnout, is it? Exhaustion. And they call burnout exhaustion from too much work. But that's psychobabble. Because how do you explain all the CEOs who've been working 70-hour weeks for 40 years? Right? They don't have burnouts because they have the why in place. First of all, they're usually men, and they have a different goal system. And very few. We can get into that another time. But this question isn't posed. Why would an HR woman, there's usually women, HR person who's been working for a year, a 35-hour week, why would she suddenly present with a burnout? It makes no sense. But it makes sense if you think about it like I just said, right? It's you suddenly looking up and not knowing why you've been spending all of this time on something that you don't even want. Suddenly you want a family and you're realizing, hold on, to have a family, I have to be married, I have to have a good partner, I have to, have a means with which to get pregnant, like I need to be fertile. All these things need to be put in place, and all I have is a career. So, that's enough to have those psychiatric symptoms. So she then, this 30-year-old woman, she then goes back to her boyfriend and starts talking about moving in, or starts talking about proposals, getting married, and he freaks out because he purposefully got together with a woman who focused on her career, because he doesn't want the whole family thing. He wants to travel. He wants to have fun. So he's freaking out and dragging his heels. And then she then gets increased negative emotions. That's not going her way. What's she gonna do? Should she stay in the relationship or should she go? And then she starts thinking, well, hold on, I'm 35. How do you even date? Where would I go? What's the dating market like? So she stays in that for a long time, and time passes and time passes. So that's the archetype of the second patient that I kept seeing, the one who's stuck in her 30s without a functional relationship, not getting anywhere towards a family, and she's slowly losing the fertility window. And she's been told those same untruths, she has the same feminist indoctrination that has led her to that point. And the third woman is then in her 40s something. She's been married. Maybe she has 2 kids, usually 2 kids. And she's been a working mom. And she has an egalitarian relationship, which means like they're both doing all the tasks, both working and both taking care of the kids and both cleaning and all that. And she's at the brink of divorce usually. She comes in with a depression. She hasn't had intimacy for a long time because she's complaining about her husband's lack of effort, how he's not helping, and that's the cause of all her troubles. And the kids have usually ADHD, maybe autism, if it's a girl, and some gender nonsense, eating disorder. The kids will have issues. And when if you have two kids who have issues, that will take over your whole life. It will be all you can think and talk about with each other. Because it takes so much time and energy. So she'll be complaining about how the husband isn't helping enough, how he isn't involved enough with the kids. And of course, those kids have gotten those disorders in the first place because they're raised by a mother who isn't really there. And because of her feminist attitudes, she's stripped the father of his authority so that he isn't parenting the kids like he should be doing. They haven't had discipline, they haven't had boundaries, right? Because he's sort of saying, okay, these aren't fights that are worth having. So I'm just going to back out. So that's then usually what's happening in these egalitarian relationships. And they're talking about divorce because, that might improve things, and it doesn't. And I've heard a lot of psychologists encourage divorce and saying, it's better for the kids to see, it's better for the kids that you're separated than to hear you argue all the time. That not that if you are cherishing more conservative values, you would think, do whatever you can to solve those problems so that you're not arguing all the time, right? Maybe if you had clearly defined roles in the house, you wouldn't be arguing all the time. To think about the children's needs before the woman's needs. So those are sort of the three types of patients that I've seen where I think, okay, these women wouldn't be in those situations if they weren't raised with feminism. And those men are then in turn also suffering, right? Men are not allowed to be masculine. They're not allowed to follow their instincts as fathers, as men. They're raised to always step aside for women, to give them their voices, etc., etc. So everyone suffers. The woman suffers, and she has contributed to a lot of issues in the children. And when children have issues, that affects the whole family. And of course, we know how men are suffering as well.
How is big problem with depression? How is common problem with depression?
How common? I didn't hear
Yes.
it properly. How common depression is?
Yes,
It
and
depends
how
on the
is big problem?
country. Yeah, it's depending on the country, it's usually around 20 to 25%. And they say that the likelihood of you having a depression in your lifetime is around 50%. So that's it's very common. But we're also overdiagnosing it a lot. We're pathologizing normal life experiences. So it's a problem with how we define depression also, first of all. And it's a problem that when you go to a psychologist or a therapist, they will put you in some category, because in most countries they have to, for insurance purposes, for their bookkeeping. It's difficult to exit a therapist office without a diagnosis. So there are a couple of things, but it's very common, and I do think that it's because we're lonely. We don't have communities. A lot of people, they don't even have one significant other. And we don't aspire to a higher goal, a higher good. We don't have noble goals.
How percent people have clinical depression? This is the most difficult type of depression.
Clinical depression, yeah, like I said, it depends on the country, but it's around 20% usually.
20%.
Yeah, it's sort of one in five. 1 in 5 is usually the number. Yeah, it's very high.
So
It's very
big.
high.
It's
Yeah,
very big problem.
it's a big problem. It's a very big problem. So that's why I said, like I said before, it's a high burden of psychiatric disease when you think about how many therapists we have, right? How much money goes into it and how much attention is getting. It's in all the TV shows. It's all over TikTok, all these different disorders. There's never been an awareness like this of mental health, and the stigma has been gone, I mean, from all of our countries for at least a decade now. And we still keep saying that, oh, the reason we have, people are suffering because there's a stigma around mental health. Like, they're not coming to therapy because they're afraid of being stigmatized, which is just not true, because the stigma it's been gone for a long time, and the burden of disease keeps rising. So.
What is depression is? You are medicine, you are doctor, you know definition. Average public and watchers not have idea what is depression. Really depression.
Yes, you're overcome by negative emotions predominantly for a long time. So it affects your sleep. It affects how you feel about yourself. It affects your relationships. It affects every area of your life. You get physically very tired, so you can't move that well. It's difficult to get out of bed in the morning. You're starting to have doubts about whether it's worth it to be alive or not, because it's emotional pain is also physically painful, right? It's the same circuit. So these negative emotions, it's just different types of pain. So depression is simply put, you're overcome by only negative emotions for a long time, and it's usually said as it's 4 weeks. That's the time limit according to the ICD-10, but it's arbitrary, right? They sat in a room, bunch of psychiatrists, and they're like, okay, how long should we say that it is? 3 weeks, 6 weeks, and then they settled on 4 weeks. So that's very arbitrary. But that's the time. So if you had these problems, and they have a checklist on this, like lack of sleep, suicidal ideation, problems getting up in the morning, low motivation, all these things, and if you've had those over a 4-week time, then you can qualify for being clinically depressed. Yeah.
What is help people who have problem with depression, clinical depression? Only medicament or sometimes?
I think it depends on what type of depression you have, what type of person you are, right? Because this is the problem. We've now made a big category of major depressional disorder. That's what it's called. And it used to be that we'd have subcategories of different depressions. Because one depressed person can look very different from the next, right? You can have often some people who had their whole lives ruined. Nothing works. They don't have a relationship. They don't have any friends. They don't have a job, or they're losing their job, or they don't have the career progression that they thought that they would, and they don't have any of these goals that they set them. Things are falling apart. They're losing their parents, or they have a terminal diagnosis. All these things that can really they're just looking at their life and in tatters around them. Nothing is going their way. Everything's broken. And of course, that person would feel only negative emotions for a long time. And I think it's a real good question if that really is a depression. But according to the clinical diagnosis, it is. And for that person, you can give medicine, sure. I believe in that it's good to give medicine so that they sleep properly, so that to give them the help that they can rebuild their lives, right, from a very functional point of view. To see what do you need so that you can keep your job, or that so your wife won't leave you, right? And then sleep is usually the first thing before you can do anything else. But another patient might have all those things. Everything is in order. He's competent. He has a good job. He has a family. And then suddenly, he'll be depressed. For what reason? Those people are very different from each other, but they'll have the same symptoms. And for that second person, a medicine is usually quite good, because it's about feeling competent, feeling secure in your competence, right? So he'll have everything in order. He'll be competent from an objective point of view, but he won't feel it, because it's controversial, but supposedly it has to do with the serotonin system. But the antidepressants are based on the serotonin pathways, so it'll enhance those. So he will feel that competence that he already has. Do you understand? So for the second person, the medicine could actually work very well. But for a person who's had every element of their life ruined, you can give whatever antidepressant you want. It's not really going to move the needle. On the other hand, we have to be honest about the side effects of these drugs, right? People can have lifelong libido problems, or at least a lot of libido problems when they're on the pill. So for men, that's very important to tell them, and to also take them off the meds. Because if you're in a relationship, your man, they're taking antidepressants, and there's suddenly their libido is gone, that's gonna ruin a lot for him. So that's something we don't talk about enough. You also there's an addiction potential to these pills. Like you're used to taking them, then addiction is wrong, but there's you do get withdrawal symptoms when you take them off the medication. So when you stop taking your antibiotics, you feel withdrawal, and that's a problem. So there's that. And there's a host of other side effects on antidepressants. It's not a good solution to have. It's not a magic pill, and it doesn't solve all depressions. And it does increase suicidal ideation, and so it's
in Croatia. We have problem with suicidal after war. We have war before 3 years ago, and we have problem with suicidal with veterans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine.
Yes, this is not a big people understand why people who going in war have trauma, and ways depression is not big things. My
right.
next
So if you
question,
have a post, yeah, go ahead.
how is Norway's change, example, in last 20 years ago?
Yeah, it has had a lot of immigration, which has changed the fabric of the country. A lot. We have a very high population of Somalis from Eritrea, and they import a lot of their problems, a lot of their warring with each other from there. So we've actually had street fights, between tribal fights on the street, which is just strange. We have a lot of immigrants, Arab immigrants, on Social Security. So like half of the pot that is for Social Security, it is doled out to Arab immigrants. That's a problem because we are giving less and less to pensioners. So Norwegians who've worked their whole life and they're now on pension, they're receiving less than what they were promised because the country isn't can't afford that no longer. And in terms of mental health, like I said, it's a steady increase. And depression, anxiety, the behavioral disorders among women and kids, and also in men, it's increasing.
I see Sweden, Denmark, France, Belgium have problem with mass immigration, with problem with blocks in city, in the blocks living only immigrant population, no go zone, very big problem, especially
That's
in
a
Sweden,
big
in
problem.
Belgium.
Norway doesn't have that yet. Norway has been more restrictive than Sweden, thankfully. So we don't have that level. We don't have Swedish conditions. But there are alarm bells ringing. There really is. So
Norway is better cooperation with Sweden, but cooperation with Hungary or Poland, Norway is not better from Hungary or Poland about mass immigration.
yeah, yes. Yeah. Do you have a last
Example,
question since I have to go soon?
my country is 92, around 92% in Croatians. Example, 4% is Serbians, Bosniaks, Hungarians, Slovaks, and we have 0,3% non-European people. We are very homogeneous society, very homogeneous country.
Yeah.
My word is totally different word. People from Sweden, England, is very multiculturalism.
Yeah. Yes.
My next question: how is problem is free speech in Western country about topic about feminism and mass immigration?
How big the problem is, or I don't understand the question. What's the problem with not having free speech from a psychological perspective?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a very big problem because we need to be able to speak to properly think things through. So what we're doing is just we're building our countries on bad ideas because there are a lot of things that we don't talk about in polite society. And so what happens is, for example, imagine you have a topic that you talk about with a friend that you've been thinking about, and you talk about it for the first time with a friend over lunch. And it's sort of like, okay, you're halting a little bit, you're not completely sure about the concept, and so you speak, and and he tells you his views, and afterwards you're thinking, I didn't say that properly, or oh, he made a good point there, he made a bad point there, and it forms a little bit. Having talked about it with him also solidifies some things in you and corrects your course. Then the next time you'll talk to another friend about the same topic that you're interested in, and then it will be a little bit better than the first time, right? You'll have conceptualized things a little better. You know what to say. It sounds better, and you're thinking, okay, you're on a better course here. And then he'll give you his views and say, he'll correct you or be enlightened, whatever. And then that's sort of how we're properly thinking when we speak. We take things to their conclusion, and we talk to each other, and we're corrected. And I think you'll also notice with people who are very lonely or never speaking to anyone, they're quite odd in the way that they'll formulate things in contact with you. They'll say things that aren't really relevant. They'll jump from topic to topic. You can really notice when people speak to others a lot and when they're very lonely, when they're very alone a lot and not thinking things through. So that's what we're doing now. We're not allowed to say bad ideas. So we're also not corrected on them, right? We don't hear all ideas. So an example of that is actually I'm working on this, reviewing this paper now about feminist teachers in Australia. And that was a big topic a little while ago because some teachers quit because they're meeting young boys in school with these anti-feminist views, right? They've been listening to Andrew Tate and his buddies online, and they're suddenly emboldened to say anti-feminist things, right? To say things like, women shouldn't drive cars. These, they're boys being boys. But these teachers are reporting that they're quitting their jobs because of this. And in this paper, it just becomes very clear that these women have never even been confronted with opposing views. That's how unresilient they are. They can't even hear in a classroom from a 12-year-old boy that men are better than women, right? That just makes them go completely rigid and, I'm feeling harassed in my own classroom. Like, that's what I listened to interviews with these women. That was what they said. And they couldn't even, these things, I tried to look for the worst thing that some of these boys said. And it was parody. It wasn't, it really wasn't bad. It was boys being boys. And they just couldn't. So that's how it's that's the point to which it's gotten now. We can't even hear something as ridiculous as women shouldn't be allowed to drive cars, they get into accidents, right?
Yes,
so that's
yes.
then
I'm
the
watching
consequence
the
of
case in Canada, the case example, guys who say only two gender exist go to jail, and other case, or moving
yes
from university. The
yeah
kicked from university is say two gender only exist. And if you
yeah
critical mass immigration and connection with crime and mass immigration and critical feminism and gender and other gender
yeah
ideology, not gender, automatically in some Western country you cancel from universities, from media, from everything, from public life.
yeah
What do you think about
it's
Jordan
a big
Peterson?
problem.
Sorry?
I think he's been amazing for young boys. I think he's an incredible thinker. I think he's the best thinker of our time, and I applaud his work. I really, yeah. I hope to do some of the same for women, because I do think that if we manage to improve how women live their lives, we can also improve it massively for the men who have to associate with them and for the children that they have. That's really where my concern is. Yeah. And speaking of kids, now I have to go pick up my own. So I have to say thank you so much for doing this, for having me on. But I have to go and pick up my kids.
Example
from school.
in COVID time, in restriction, mass, and crazy stuff in 2020. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, not have restriction, not have masks, not have COVID pass. And Bosnia and Herzegovina, only 30% people is vaccinated. Only 30%
Wow.
people.
Wow.
example, all Western countries have 80%. Example, in Croatia, 50-50, 55% maybe vaccinated, 45 is not.
Wow.
But we are
Well, I
famous
think
for corruption. Maybe many people who is vaccinated is not vaccinated pay for.
yeah, I think, but I think we have to, I think we have to get to COVID another time because I have to leave you now, sadly. But
Sorry,
thank you
I
so
see
much.
new question. Authors' books to recommend or YouTube channel?
Oh, um, I would go with the classics. I would really read the classics. I loved Ben Shapiro's Right Side of History. I mean, I think that's my favorite. And if you're interested in philosophy and psychology, I would read Theodore Darmo. He's absolutely brilliant. He's written a lot of books. My favorite was The Toxic Cult of Sentimentality, Spoiled Rotten, The Toxic Cult of Sentimentality from Theodore Darmo. And he's coming on Psychobabble in a few weeks. I had a long interview with him. So I really would recommend everyone to go and subscribe there so you catch the interview with him, because he is a brilliant thinker, also a psychiatrist. So yeah, go and check out Psychobabble. In any case, if any of this interests you, I go into detail about a lot of these topics. This was just sort of an overview of all the important points.
Which is favorite podcast for a recommend?
I like trigonometry. It's politics, trigonometry. Yeah, I listen to a lot of different things. I like Alex Clark and Ali Beth Stuckey. I listen to a lot.
Where the world is going for 10 years, 15 years, what do you think?
Oh, I think it's it depends on who wins the American election now, I think.
What do you think
I think we have
about
to get back to that.
what do you think about election in the United States?
Oh, I think it's going to be very interesting. Seems like they're in a dead heat. It's really 50-50. I hope Trump wins. I for the whole world, I think we're dependent on Trump winning. So I'm worried. I'm very worried he won't. I'm very worried that he won't. Yeah. I'm scared. I'm scared of the Democrats in the United States. I think they're ruthless. I don't think they care about anything else but being empowered. I mean, an example is that Obama they caught him saying how there's nothing that Biden doesn't F up. And then I just sit there thinking, well, why do you want him to govern your country? Why are you supporting all these people that you hate in private? You think there's nothing he can touch, that he can't screw up, and then you're supporting him for president? What, like, these people, and I think that Trump is the one that's really in touch with the problems people have, the problems that need to be solved first. Like, yes, he's rich, but he's not an elitist. And if there's anything I hate more than anything, is that people that think they're better than, be it because they're really intelligent or rich or old money, doesn't matter. I don't like it when people look down on others for whatever reason. I don't like it when people are out of touch and think they're arrogant and are arrogant because of it. Don't like that one bit. So that's why I support Trump.
Thanks. I agree with you. Election in the United States is very matter for war in Ukraine and Russia, for conflict in Middle East, for question about mass immigration, about genderism and
Yeah.
other, and overtop Windhoek is very matter. If Trump is win, overtop Windhoek is moving in the right. Is Camilla is totally left.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thanks for podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on.
I hope the podcast is good for you. And
yes,
final
sorry
message
to cut it short, but I want to. I don't want things to be waiting outside of school and Mama's not there. That would be terrible for me. So yeah, we'll do more another time, I think. That's okay.
Your final message for public and for watchers.
Well, that will of course be to please go and check out my channel, Psychobabble with Spier. I have a YouTube channel, so pop over there and check it out and help me out. I think we're on the same kind of mission here, and that would really help me.
Thanks, and subscribe and share this podcast.
Good.